So, am I right in understanding that chaos really does reign in startups?
Yes, and we've worked a lot on our processes.
Freedom, money, metrics, screw-ups, drive.
Development, team lead, CTO. I need a team that can bring my ideas to life.
I can't keep up a conversation, I can't dream about something, think things through, give a thoughtful, competent answer to a question. I can't make a decision.
No, of course, you have to think first and foremost before you act.
Just do it as it goes and we'll figure it out later.
That's normal, it happens to everyone.
Business needs things done quickly, but development needs quality.
It's important not to drag things out here. In this case, you actually can't test it because it doesn't start up.
Hello everyone, you're watching the Axiomica channel. This is my debut episode on our corporate channel. Because of that, I'll be happy to get your feedback in the comments. Get ready, make yourselves comfortable, we're starting. Today we have an unusual episode. Previously we used to release content related to crypto projects, some forecasts and expectations. And also about what's happening in the crypto market right now, but today we have a completely different format. Today we're going to talk about project development. Yes, about how to create a startup, or more precisely, not just how to create it, but how to develop and launch it. We'll discuss how an MVP differs from a full-fledged product, in which cases it's better to launch an MVP, and when it's better to do things properly from the start. I think today's episode will be useful for heads of development departments, CTOs, various technical leaders, and just anyone who wants to launch their own startup. Or if you're already an experienced business professional, I think it will also be helpful to learn how to do things more correctly and efficiently. How to implement the technical part of a project in such a way that you can launch it quickly and with the lowest possible budget. Friends, today our guest is Alexey Zabatov, a very experienced person who has come a long way from chaotic startup launches to building a very serious business. He has experience working in startups, in enterprise, and in the banking sector. I can say that this is someone who knows everything about development, from building a team to launching a product. Alexey, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Alexey, please tell us about yourself. What do you do? What experience do you have? What path have you taken?
In development. I've probably been doing this for about 15 years now. Like many others, I started out with code implementation. On my personal journey, I went from being a developer to a CTO, participated in various projects and teams. I've managed teams of different sizes, from 3 or 4 people up to 60. Probably one of the more recent and interesting experiences I've had was when I was CTO at a mining pool, where our team grew from 15 to 60 people. The technical team was under my supervision. And
what are you doing now?
Now I have my own company. We do development, also in fintech and crypto.
Today, many developers dream of working at a startup because there's freedom, there's money, there's drive, but at the same time, some people actually prefer the stability of enterprise. Alexey, you have experience in both. So please tell us, what is the biggest difference between development in a startup and in an enterprise?
Depending on whether it's an enterprise or a startup, first of all, when you join a startup, you might have nothing at all, no tools, no code. You build everything from scratch. You design the entire architecture yourself if you a team lead or some senior developer. But if you join an enterprise, usually everything is already set up for you. There are ready-made tools, a DevOps team, and other roles on the project, like project managers, analysts, and so on. But in a startup, you have to build everything from scratch, and usually communication happens directly with the founder or founders. Typically, for the first couple of years, they interact directly with the developers. That is, only over time, as the team grows, this starts to change. That's when you start to see, let's say, loss of direct communication as the founders begin to communicate with leads and managers instead. They handle product development, and only then do they communicate with the developer.
So, am I right in understanding that chaos reigns in startups?
It depends on the management. Because the processes aren't established, that's for sure. That means the process might not be repeatable each time. Every time it can go differently. And only over time does it settle down, things get cemented, and then the process starts running along established tracks.
Alexey, imagine this. Tomorrow you launch your own company. What processes, what actions would you start with?
If I'm launching a team from the founder's perspective and it's about development, then first and foremost, of course, I need a team that can bring my ideas to life. Depending on the project's budget and its complexity, we can consider different team sizes. And in general, whether we're talking about managing a startup, a department, a division, a directorate, and so on, it's always a matter of controlling the work, setting up the work, formalizing tasks, and monitoring them. Accordingly, it doesn't matter whether it's a startup or a large organization. You need to monitor the work. Especially probably at the startup stage, it's important to organize daily meetings. Meetings, because I've seen situations where people get together only once a week, but that doesn't work at all and doesn't allow you to quickly adjust the course the startup is taking. That's why it's important to gather and communicate as often as possible. At the same time, of course, without interfering with the developers doing their tasks, if we're talking about monitoring development.
How often exactly should everyone meet?
I think yes. Well, in Agile, if we're talking about Agile,
dailies.
In fact, stand-ups are literally 15 to 20 minutes so that everyone gathers, gets on the same page, understands who is doing what, who is stuck where, and then moves on.
Today, in almost every company, there comes a point when the business needs things done quickly, but development needs things done with quality. How do you find that golden mean so you don't drown in bureaucracy? Yes, for example, with process descriptions and documentation, but at the same time, maintain speed.
There are various tools for this nowadays. First of all, again, if your processes aren't formalized, if you don't want to write a lot of documentation, then you can communicate more frequently. This isn't the best way to implement projects because over time, even for the QA team, it will be very difficult to test the project if there is no documentation, nothing is recorded, and there's no logic captured about what the team has implemented. So I would recommend at the very least, if you're working on some MVP and putting something together quickly, to document the outcomes of meetings and record the decisions you've made from a development perspective. I had a case in my practice where, based on a business idea, the team wanted to build a fundamental tool, a full-fledged functionality, spend several months on development, and then hand it over to the business. But at the same time, we reached a compromise with the business because we didn't know whether the product would work or not, or if it would generate any revenue. We quickly put together a landing page and started collecting client data and their requests in the database, and then the managers processed these requests manually. We didn't develop any complex functionality. We basically carried out the process manually, realized that the idea didn't work, that there was no demand from clients, and didn't spend large budgets on development.
How? How do you measure the effectiveness of the development team specifically? What metrics do you pay attention to first and why?
For me, the basic metrics are meeting deadlines and the number of bugs, and there are actually two indicators for bugs. The first indicator is the number of bugs found in production, and the second is the number of bugs found by testers during testing.
A personal question from my own experience. Could you please advise me? You know, I've often encountered this in practice. There are two developers of the same level, but one of them usually writes code without bugs right away, while the other developer, he also writes code, follows all the style guidelines and order, but for some reason, his code ends up being very buggy. What do you think this depends on? And if you have to choose between the first and the second developer, the one who doesn't make mistakes, should you just write off the second one? Or is this something that can be fixed somehow?
It depends on the reasons why these problems are happening. Maybe the tasks are different, and maybe they're described differently. Maybe managers describe them differently for different developers. In other words, the teams are different. I can expand on this picture even more. Sometimes there are developers who are slow, and there are developers who are very fast. And the difference in implementing functionality can be several times over. Here, it's a question for management. How well does management work with people, select the team, and work with it? And if necessary, of course, they let people go, those who deliver poor quality solutions.
You've often talked about balance, but what about compromises between speed, deadlines, and quality? What is the most painful for you?
Of course, quality.
They say that a strong CTO is, above all, not about technology, but about the team. And today, it's hard to hire a good developer and even harder to keep one. What do you look for when hiring? That is, what signals are the most important to you in a candidate, in a future employee?
Initiative is important to me. I want to see a spark in a person's eyes, and I value systematic thinking. I believe that's the key to success. If someone has systematic thinking, mastering any development tool won't be difficult for them, or switching from one programming language to another. I also pay attention to their outlook, to how broadly they look beyond the role they perform, beyond what they do. If it's a developer, it's important that they also look around them from the perspective of process organization, management, tasks, and in general, the implementation of the product and projects, how the project is progressing. Because if a person has this understanding, then a lot of these issues get resolved in the project because they've even built up the project manager. They'll back up the product and everyone else too. So it's important that a person is like that in this regard. There's a term for this, T-shaped. They have their main function, but they're not limited to it and also know things from the sides. As for what the team does,
what do you think regarding whether it's better to grow, for example, a lead within the company and team, or to hire a strong one right away? In your opinion, what are the differences between these two approaches?
It depends on whether you already have a prepared specialist. If you have someone who has already grown within the team and you understand that they can take the position, then of course it's better to promote from within, but that's not always possible. And
when hiring someone from outside for a responsible high-level position, for example, CTO or lead, team lead, what risks might there be when hiring such a person? From outside?
Yes, the risks are basically the classic ones. It doesn't really matter whether you're hiring a developer or a manager. The biggest risk is that they might lead the team in the wrong direction. And well, if you hire someone who's completely inadequate, then of course your team might even fall apart. The team. Not only does your product development stall, but you could also end up in a situation where there's no one left to support the product. I think that's a rare case more often. It's just that managers and founders or their own supervisors don't see eye to eye or have different approaches to work.
You mentioned that if there's someone on the team who has already grown, it's better to promote them and make them a lead or a manager, whatever the title may be. But how do you know when someone, for example, a developer, is ready to become a lead?
Well, the classic scenario is when a person can handle tasks independently, communicates directly with the business, so you can rely on them and they can cover for you if needed. And you can see that at the very least, they're also pretty good when it comes to organizing work. Plus, the person also needs to be psychologically ready for this. In my experience, I've had people who, even though they held managerial positions, well, to be precise, they were promoted to those positions by promoters, but it quickly became clear that the person couldn't handle it. And it's specifically a psychological issue. They just can't handle it mentally. And such people, as a rule, return to a regular position and work there calmly. They simply realize that it's not for them.
How can you tell that a person can't handle it emotionally and psychologically?
Well, for example, they start to lose their temper. That is, in situations where, even in a fairly calm situation, there might be a minor conflict or some kind of argument where you just need to explain your position with reasoning, but people just can't handle it. But as a rule, you can see this even before the person is promoted to that position. And simply, such people never make it to managerial positions.
Now, we're going to start a section about screw-ups. My first question is, has it often happened that due to hiring mistakes, you had to deal with expensive issues with the team or development? Did you then have to solve costly problems with the team or development? The next question is along the same lines. What were the toughest screw-ups you've experienced?
About people and about some personal screw-ups. Honestly, I can't really recall anything like that. Probably it just hasn't happened. I mean, if we hired people who weren't quite right for us, it went pretty smoothly because we quickly noticed it wasn't the right person and made a replacement right away. The key here is not to drag things out. It's especially important for a manager not to delay, because there are managers who, due to inexperience, think, well, I'll put up with it a bit longer, maybe they'll improve, maybe things will work out. But most often, if you already have doubts, nothing is going to work out. It's better to part ways with such a person quickly and find a replacement. Then it won't be critical for the project.
People don't change?
Yes, there are exceptions. There are exceptions. but usually they're related to the fact that you either put this person in a different role or you give them different tasks. But
sometimes it happens that you didn't do anything. It's just that you gave them a talking to, had some kind of motivational conversation, and the person really got on track. This actually happens. Have you ever had that happen in your experience?
yes, I have.
And how did that process go? Step by step, maybe a couple of...
Yeah, sometimes everyone goes through some negative moments in life. And it's important to talk to each person individually, not just treat everyone the same way, like putting everyone under the same comb. But you need to understand how each specific person is wired. And if someone has some personal issues, sometimes you just need to let them resolve those problems. If we're talking about when you gave someone a talking to, let's call it that, and they improved, usually it doesn't happen quickly. So you either end up realizing you need to let the person go, or you just start monitoring them more systematically. You increase your oversight, start watching them more and more. You keep controlling them until they reach some kind of stable performance, but usually it's just a waste of time. Spending a lot of time on just one person is very costly. You could spend weeks or even months trying to get someone back on track.
Hello, this is the Axiom channel. Our company develops Web3 products for businesses, and we address a wide range of issues related to the tokenization of your business and other products. We develop smart contracts, launch blockchain projects, and of course share our expertise through our YouTube channel so you can understand what cryptocurrency is. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated on news and new releases. This is Axiom.
Alexey, right now, burnout is a really popular topic, not just among IT people. It's a trendy word everywhere. Yeah, before it used to be called laziness, but now it's got this trendy new name. I'm burned out, don't bother me. But honestly, I take this seriously. I burn out myself quite often, and most of the time it happens because you work steadily for a while. And then suddenly something happens, like a bunch of orders come in. Or maybe a lot of projects come in for estimation, or someone gets sick, and as a result, your workload increases. And for example, I still haven't found a way to protect myself from this. And accordingly, in such moments, I really burn out. I mean, in just 3 days, I can get to a state where, first of all, I don't understand anything people are saying to me at all. I'm stuck in my own processes in my head. I'm only thinking about, well, basically, I turn into a machine. I can't keep up a conversation. I can't dream or think about anything. I can't answer questions thoughtfully or intelligently. I can't make decisions. So basically, the question is, how do you deal with this? Do you experience burnout? How often does this happen?
I think what you described sounds more like overload than burnout, because burnout is a process, a rather long one, and a person gradually slips into it. Either they lose the sense of meaning in what they're doing. Maybe he has some concerns that, again, aren't directly related to work. Maybe if we're talking about developers, maybe he's just tired of development altogether. He just does tasks on autopilot because he's getting paid for it. If we're talking about this kind of overload, then probably the only option is to try to delegate. Why does overload happen? Because you take on too much yourself. That's normal. It happens to everyone. Sometimes tasks pile up, but it's important that you have some kind of support. Either it's a team to whom you can delegate some of the tasks, or you just go into this mode for a few days, a week, or even longer. You go into berserker mode and tackle all the tasks, then you come out onto a plateau and everything calms down again and work proceeds steadily. And
do you yourself sometimes personally experience overload?
There are always so many tasks that all your free time, as a rule, yes, your mind is still occupied with thoughts about unresolved tasks. Because as soon as you solve some, new ones come up. That's why I'm always focused on work. It's always on my mind. I'm always thinking about what I'll do tomorrow or what decision I'll make. I'll make a decision tomorrow. So I always have there's always an unresolved issue simmering in my head, and I end up finding some solution. Probably to some extent, this helps save work time on all this thinking, because you might be driving somewhere after work or, roughly speaking, walking to the store and thinking over some work issues. And
how do you usually deal with overload in situations like this?
I just live. And, well, more sports. Listen, I go to work out at least 3 times a week. Plus, I do functional training. It's a CrossFit gym, but the workouts are functional. They focus on endurance too. It works both for endurance and for strength. In winter, I try to go snowboarding. It really helps me unwind. And in general, I like free riding, riding in the backcountry. It really helps clear my mind.
Where do you ride?
Actually, I've been snowboarding in Turkey, Krasnaya Polyana, Sheregesh, and Kirovsk. But I liked Sheregesh the most. In Sochi, the mountains are pretty steep. It's fun there, but it takes a lot of energy. Whereas the powder in Sheregesh is awesome because the slopes are pretty gentle there. So you end up enjoying it more just by surfing through untouched snow.
Thank you. That was a bit of a lyrical digression to find out how experienced IT specialists at CTO spend their free time and unwind from work tasks. As for burnout, you said that's a different thing. Could you please tell us what usually causes burnout? That's the first question, and the second is, how do you deal with it?
Perhaps, if we're talking about developers again, maybe it's necessary to give them a different task. Because there are people who work on the same project, doing more or less the same thing, especially if it's some kind of routine function. I don't know, maybe they're doing the same type of integrations, for example. If a person gets bored, you need to talk to them about it. I mean, somehow you realize that someone on your team is starting to burn out. Either they tell you themselves, or they mention they're planning to quit, or you notice from their work that their productivity has dropped, or you see some external signs, like increased irritability. You definitely need to talk to the person and understand the reasons and offer them some alternatives. Maybe they need to be transferred to another department. Or maybe you just need to give them a different task within their current department and area. Or, for example, expand their area of responsibility, because there are people who start to get bored with development. Maybe they want to interact more with the business side.
Alexey, architectural mistakes. That's quite painful. What kinds of architectural mistakes have you encountered in your practice?
I probably haven't encountered any super critical mistakes, because one way or another the system kept working, but fixing them sometimes took quite a lot of time. Or sometimes the project just kept going with these issues and they were fixed somewhere on the side. And
how do you approach scaling? Do you build with extra capacity from the start, or just go with the flow and deal with it later?
No, of course, you have to think first and foremost before you do anything. And you can design and build things on the fly, but as we discussed earlier, you need to find a certain balance and understand which tasks you can do quickly. For which tasks do you need to build things right away, and for which do you need to lay down some fundamental mechanisms? Yes, as a rule, this applies to the core. This concerns the very architecture, how the system components will interact with each other, and where you need to allocate resources. Maybe it's some kind of microservice because you realize that this part will need to scale while everything else will basically continue to function as it does now. Well, it's an evolutionary process. At first, if you have a small project, you build some kind of monolith. Then, as it starts to grow, you begin to have more heavily loaded components and you start moving them into microservices. And that's how they start to branch off, but that's only if your project is growing from something small. If you're planning something big and large scale from the start, then of course you need to design and incorporate that into the architecture from the very beginning. You might not implement it in code right away or split things up like that immediately, but it's still a good idea to set up some separate components from the start, and if necessary, split the database into several parts right away.
And microservices in particular are a never-ending topic. Many people think they're a cure-all. What do you think? In which cases is it right to use them? And when is it better to just build a monolith?
I don't think microservices are a cure-all, because microservices just move your problems to a different level of abstraction. So everything works fine in your code, but at the same time, you're just shifting the problems more to the infrastructure level. Of course, there are many different tools that solve these kinds of problems.
Like what, for example?
The same service mesh, for example. You need to understand what problem you're trying to solve with microservices. And if from the very beginning you say, that's it, I'm going to have such an awesome system, maybe in 3 or 5 years, so I'll just build everything with microservices right now, most likely you're creating a problem for yourself, because you'll have to solve things at the infrastructure level. A large number of tasks that you could avoid dealing with at the very start. Your developers will start tearing their hair out because it will be hard for them to even understand how the microservices communicate with each other. Again, you'll need to create additional tools to make all this work together and to improve observability. So if you're starting with something small, it's definitely better to build a monolith. But if you realize that somewhere you already have parts that operate quite independently and that might quickly experience increased load, then it makes sense, of course, to immediately separate them out and design them so that they can be managed and scaled independently.
Alexey, look, a CTO. Today, it's not just the main tech person, it's also an architect, a negotiator, and someone who bridges the gap between business and development. And at the same time, they also know how to write code, do code reviews, and mentor developers. So the question is, what are your strengths as a CTO?
I can both communicate with the business quickly and clearly understand what the business needs, and when necessary, dive into the technical implementation. I think that's probably one of my strongest qualities, which it allows me to work in the positions I hold now.
When there's a lot of uncertainty and confusion all around, what do you usually rely on in order to make your important decisions?
As a rule, I rely on common sense. If there's uncertainty, it must have come from somewhere. You can discuss it with the team. If we're talking about a specific task we're solving, for example, for business matters, it's essential to discuss it with the business side. That is, maybe you're misunderstanding something. Maybe the business will give you some advice or, in general, help you find the optimal solution to their own problem. And of course, it's also important to talk with the team often, rather than just mulling things over by yourself. That could end badly, so if you have a team, it's better to discuss things with them and find the optimal solution together.
And are you more of a techie or a visionary yourself?
It depends on what you mean by visionary. I probably combine both roles. Again, for a CTO, strategy is important. It's important for a CTO to understand where development is heading, not just to solve the current task, but also to understand what comes next after we solve it. And in general, where we'll be in a year, in 2 years, and so on, depending on the business plans. So it could be a startup that needs to survive right now, or it could be an enterprise where your implementation will live in the system for many years. That's why it's important to look ahead and to build a technological strategy. And
how do you help your team grow?
Sometimes we send our team members to important conferences, and we purchase paid courses if necessary. There have been cases when we held games in the office, inviting teams that organize various strategic games, which help the team, for example, to bond. Sometimes I organized meetups right in the office. So we would stay after work. We would agree in advance on a topic, and the guys would prepare presentations on it. Or rather, the guys themselves would take the initiative and say they wanted to talk about something. It could be something technical, maybe the implementation of some feature. Or if we're talking about changes like architectural ones, the architect could just present at the meetup and generally talk about it, about what we're working on now and where we're heading. Were there people who wanted to prepare and present talks on unrelated topics like psychology to everyone? That's how the team bonded. The team would come together around these kinds of events, and it became a sort of shared pastime outside of work, so to speak.
A talk on psychology?
Yeah.
In development.
Development.
Interesting. Right now, crypto is trending. AI too, yeah. It's everywhere. In Chile, AI, we've got it here too. There's ChatGPT. They hooked it up via API, and now it's like, whoa, look at us. So what do you think, given all this, which tech stack will be relevant for the next 3 years?
I think everything is very niche. If we look at banks, you can't go anywhere without Java. If we look at some crypto projects, I guess right now it's mostly Go, Python, Pyho. Well, if we're talking about smart contracts, obviously there's a specific tech stack for that. Solidity, Rust, and so on. So it's hard to say for sure, but the languages I mentioned, I think they're here to stay for a long time. They're the main ones used in development.
And why is Java used in banks? What's so great about this language anyway?
Java has been around for many years, and over that time, it has already developed a pretty good selection of libraries and frameworks. It's a compiled language, and as a result, it's generally considered to be quite fast. I think those are the main reasons why banks use Java.
But there are also other old, let's say, programming languages. For example, I know that C++ is also used by many web services, and C# with ASP.NET, of course, is quite popular. I've worked with it myself, but still, I notice that it's used quite often.
Yeah, by the way, CX is used a lot, especially now that it's become cross-platform and there's .NET Core. Yes, that too. It's used in banks. Well, C++ is again quite a niche language. I think it's very efficient, but at the same time, as I understand it, I haven't coded in C++ myself. As I understand, it's harder to write in it.
And what's your stack?
Languages such as PHP, Go, and Python.
By the way, I've noticed that PHP and Go are paired together really often. Seriously, just about anyone, basically. Any PHP developer knows Go, but not every Go developer knows PHP.
Yeah, but look, we had guys who moved to projects where they were rewriting components from PHP to Go. So that was a real trend, and it's still happening now. If you look at big companies, even Russian ones, there's this trend where things were originally written in PHP, and then everyone started rewriting them in Go, and that process is still ongoing. That's why there's such a huge demand right now. There's still a need for people who can come in, look at what's written in PHP, support it, and then gradually migrate components to Go.
Alexey, and now, like I said, there's a real boom, and yeah, information is coming from everywhere about how you need to learn it and how people are already doing it, you know. At the same time, of course, I haven't heard of it successfully passing the Turing test. Still, people are saying that soon, for example, certain professions will disappear. For instance, copywriting as a profession is already becoming unnecessary because, for example, we've trained a model. We give it a prompt with facts in the right format, and it produces a pretty good result for us. We get a quality text, which a manager, for example, can tweak a little, and in the end, no one can tell that it was generated by a model.
You know, I don't really think it's 100% exactly like that right now, to be honest. Right now, at this very moment, we're actually experiencing what can only be described as a significant and remarkable new technological leap forward, and a surprisingly large number of people who previously didn't know how to code at all, not even a little bit, can already deploy some working solutions into production environments. At the moment, these solutions are not always of high quality and don't always work exactly as they should, probably, but this is still a notable change. But the effect is obvious. There are now many different and even contradictory studies. Some say it doesn't help, while others are absolutely thrilled. But the need for people to carry out a number of tasks is diminishing. What I like most, even unrelated to coding, about AI is how it generates images, especially videos. It's just insane. Just think how much money will now be saved on production, graphics, and so on. Probably billions of dollars, really. That's awesome. It's awesome that you can, I don't know, just buy a license now for, what, $100 or $200, something like that, probably.
$250,000 a month?
Well, there's no video there. There are models that work with video, and I think the subscription is more expensive there, but that's not the point. It's awesome that you can make your own ad with some super effects or even shoot an entire movie. Of course, just 5 years ago, you couldn't even imagine something like this. And I remember there was some presentation, I think, from NVIDIA when there was some kind of AI that would draw based on brush strokes. If you take blue paint and draw with a brush, it paints a waterfall for you. If you, I don't know, throw on some green, it draws trees for you. Now you just write some text and it gives you a finished video. That's really cool. As for development, I think the role of the developer will gradually start to fade and shift in another direction. Some kind of architect or systems analyst, meaning someone who clearly understands the requirements, what needs to be done, and can ask the AI to draft the implementation and the logic itself. Over time, I think this level of abstraction in setting tasks for AI will rise even higher. Even now, there are entrepreneurs who, with the help of AI, without developers, are able to do certain things. It's just that over time, this will become easier and easier to do. But AI still has its limitations because it's fed by a certain data set, data from the internet, maybe some closed databases. But even so, it's still a finite story. And besides, there are still some glitches for now. I've personally encountered situations where AI would give me some instructions. Do this, then that, step 1, 2, 3, 4. Like run something in the console, do something else, and then suddenly you'll have this cool thing set up on your computer. But unfortunately, that just doesn't happen. That's because there is very little data on the topic I was interested in. Apparently, it can't gather enough of a data set to give you a proper answer.
Yeah, I've also heard that the main task for these models is just to give you an answer. So the quality of the answer comes second. That's in second place. So the primary goal is just to respond with something. That's why, yeah, I've also run into this kind of situation when I was writing software on Copilot. This was on the early version of Copilot Chat 5 from GitHub, and I actually spent about 8 hours on it. The funny thing is, Copilot Chat 5 told me, just have someone call this function and everything will work for you. I tried everything, but it just kept giving me an error saying that such a function doesn't exist. So what do? I go to the documentation, check it out, and it turns out that this function has never existed at all. Only after I told Copilot Chat 5 like 3 times to reread the documentation, only then did it finally accept that, in fact, this function doesn't exist. It apologized and gave me another solution. But overall, by the way, there was this cool case where I built a product in 15 hours and I didn't even need to do much, just had to put together some analytics. And then I could hand it over to the development department to take it further. But in those 15 hours, I solved everything completely, handed my code over to the developers, and they understood what needed to be done even faster and got it done. Do you use AI in your own work?
Yes, of course I do. And here, I think that AI is not a detriment, but actually a benefit to developers. It really gives you a kind of leverage or advantage, allowing you to implement the tasks you need to do much faster.
Alexey, do you use AI yourself? And if so, which ones?
For general questions, I usually use ChatGPT or DeepSec, but for development, you can use Cursor. I think that's the most popular development tool right now.
Alexey, our interview is gradually coming to an end, and I'd like to finish it with a quick Blitz round. I'll ask you 7 questions, and the goal is to answer as briefly and concisely as possible, if I can put it that way. The first question is, what book would you definitely recommend to every developer?
I would recommend reading a number of books by Fowler. He has books on architecture, design patterns, and the mythical man month. And
what about for beginner developers?
For beginners, just any general books on development. The most popular ones from the top, top 10. If you search in Google or ask ChatGPT, it'll give you a good result.
Next question. What tool can you not do without in your work?
ChatGPT.
That's all?
Yes.
Interesting.
Mostly listen. Lately, it's been a lot of ChatGPT.
Next question. Startup or corporation?
Something in between. Something in the middle between the two.
What's more important for a CTO, strategy, or getting into the technical implementation?
Strategy. Undoubtedly, strategy comes first, but it should be based on technical implementation. In other words, you need to understand the technical implementation in order to create a strategy. And the strategy should be based on the business strategy.
What's your main anti-pattern in development?
Probably trying to add people at the final stages of development. Adding people to the project.
The programming language of the future.
Natural language, Russian, English. Because there will be AI.
But that's not programming. But
when it comes to programming, everything is very niche, as we discussed earlier. So I think that if we're talking about how development and implementation will be organized in general, more often than not, it will be some kind of prompts.
In short, what's the task? Such a language, such a tool.
Yes.
Understood. What recommendations or guidance can you give to a young, aspiring developer who is just starting out in the field?
Broaden your horizons, take an interest in what's happening outside of your work, so to speak, and show initiative. But,
for example, what outside of work should you be interested in?
Be interested in what the project is about, what the product is about, and why you're doing it. That is, don't stay inside, don't remain closed off, don't just sit in your own little bubble, working on some specific task. You should always know why you're doing something, what it's for. You need to communicate with your team, talk to the people around you who are involved in the project or close to it. I believe that's the key to success.
Yes, Alexey, thank you very much for the interview. Honestly, I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot of new things for myself today.
Yes, Iskander, thank you very much for the interview.